Good evening. They are wrapping up the session at the SBC right now, so we're going to take just the next couple of minutes. They've postponed the major action we were waiting on, which was about the Abuse Reform Implementation Task Force report. So that's been postponed until tomorrow morning. So that's a good thing because of the time they're running so far behind. But if you're watching already, if you'll just stay patient for another few minutes, then we're going to jump on and do a rundown of what happened this afternoon. There we go. I need to unmute. Sorry about that. But anyway, welcome to our evening session of our commentary and analysis on the SBC 23 meeting, annual meeting in New Orleans. Had been a fairly interesting afternoon. Didn't have as many fireworks as I think some were anticipating that there may be. One of the things I said when I was muted was we've got several individuals that are planning on joining us. A number of the guys that had said they were going to try to join us for these sessions are actually in New Orleans. So it's kind of hairy in trying to get to a place where you can actually call in and be quiet enough that they can hear. But we're glad to have you already on here with us. We're going to walk through some things. And as those guys jump in, however many of them can join us, we'll have them kind of jump in with some impressions and kind of what they thought some highlights were of the day at that point. But anyway, let's go ahead and jump into it and walk into several of the key things that happened during the day. One of the big things that people were waiting on because of the publicity was basically the vote on Saddleback. So we'll get to that here in just a moment. That was taken, as well as two other churches. Those were all brought. They filed appeals on the executive committee and the committee on committees action, or the credentials, not committee on committee, credentials committee. And so the convention did take action on those, resounding actually on that. Let me go ahead and hit on the presidential election. We may come back on this in just excuse me. Sorry about that. Really got something in my throat. Presidential election is what I was going to talk about. When we look at the presidential election, kind of the pundits, I guess you could say, especially on Twitter and other places, are battling back and forth, fighting about who would win. Heard some talk about possibly a third party being nominated, kind of as a spoiler, maybe at that point. And of course, that could be done from the floor. The only two announced candidates were Barber and Mike Stone. And as you see, I've put on the screen here what the final totals were in the presidential election. So Bart Barber won with 68.38% of the vote, and Mike Stone received 41.4%. So not really a close election at all. Typically, I shouldn't say typically, maybe historically is a better way of saying it. Historically, Southern Baptists have had the president, the role is only elected for a single year, but historically they've pretty much said, look, it can roll over to a second year, and it's kind of a courtesy thing. It's not required. There's nothing in our bylaws or anything that requires it, but it's kind of like, if they get elected one time, then it serves twice. Back during the conservative resurgence, when all that was happening in the 70s, and then the 80s, there was about a 10-year period where that was just a real battle, very, very heated. And when all that was going on, the strategy was very much, we've got to keep our president in there for 2 years. And that kind of custom had been put in place long before that, historically. But that was a real battle. And many of those years, there was somebody running in opposition to him because people started realizing, well, the president doesn't have a lot of power, but what power he has, he can put trustees on these boards, and that's how we're going to change what we want to change, particularly with the seminaries, because they were sensing that liberal drift in the seminaries, and they wanted to correct that. So anyway, there wasn't a third-party spoiler. And it was only these two individuals. So Barbara will serve a second year. Let me just comment real quickly before we have somebody else join about Barbara. Barbara is from a smaller church. Typically, in the most recent years, for sure, pastors who have been elected to be president have typically come from these large mega churches. You'll remember names like Adrian Rogers and those kind of course, of Johnny Hunt and some of these guys that have been elected over the years. And so with those individuals being elected, they come from major churches, large churches. So it was pretty unusual for smaller church pastors to have been nominated in the last few years. Mike Stone, of course, was nominated the first time back in Nashville 2 years ago, and there was all the blow up about the sexual abuse, and Hannah Kate, which was one of the abuse survivors, ended up with a big confrontation with him the night before the election when that was scheduled. And that was just a big blow up. Accusations being made about what he said and what he did and all that kind of thing. One of the motions that was made earlier today, it was eventually thrown out when the Order of Business Committee came back. But it was a motion that they were trying to get the video released of the security video released there at Nashville in the Nashville theater or hallway outside of the where the convention was being held, and have that released because there's security video footage that the executive committee has. And the motion basically said that before the election of the president today, he requested that Baptist Press release that and send that out across the SBC to be able to clear up the name of Mike Stone, because his name had been imputed at that point severely. And so that was brought forth, but was ruled out of order. They appealed that being ruled out of order. And long story short, it still stayed out of order, but primarily because when the guy made the motion, this is why it's so important. If you're making a motion or a resolution at one of these huge conventions, they stick literally just every paragraph of Robert's Rules of Order. They're going to stick to it, because you just can't have 11, 12,000 people in a room with the potential of making motions and you not stick within some rules. So that's what they stick to. But anyway, what he said was he wanted that done before the presidential election today, which meant it had to be done before the middle of the afternoon. And so the executive committee and the others that were involved in that couldn't assemble. Plus, the other thing that Bart Barber said in responding to that was basically that that they have certain time requirements that they're required to meet. So what that means is they're required before they have a meeting to announce it like 2 weeks in advance or a week in advance or something. So I don't know exactly what the timetable is, but anyway, that was the other reason it was ruled out of order. So the fellow who made that motion kind of went back and forth with the chair quite a bit there for a while. And he eventually basically said that he would like to just, recommend that video be put out regardless, forget the time restraint. And that couldn't be done at that point because his motion had already been ruled out of order. And the motion had a time restraint. So again, sticking very closely to parliamentary procedure at that point. And so they, and Barbara was very kind. He's been very kind all day. But he was very kind to the gentleman and basically just told him that he needed to make another motion saying that video should be released and asking them to do that and not putting the time restraint on it. That way it could be done a little bit later. But that was one of the things that kind of surfaced at that time. There are several other things. We saw the entity reports as we started off. We had several different things that were happening. We had the NAM report this morning, obviously, and then the rest have a number of the other entity reports. WMU, Guidestone, Lifeway, and the ERLC will be done tomorrow morning. And they did have a good bit of trouble staying on time, at that point. Yeah, James, I agree. They need to release that security video. There shouldn't. And that was one of the things this messenger, he made the comment about. He made the comment that, we need to look for truth, and that hasn't come out at this point, and so we need to go ahead and do that. And I agree with them. That should have been done and needs to still go ahead and be done without any doubt, for sure. Well, the rest of the day, we moved on into the Committee on Resolutions, and they presented a number of different things. I've already mentioned the election of the president. A number of people are interested in that and seeing exactly what came of that. We just talked about that briefly. So I was just one of our guys. I'm looking real fast here. He was texting me this about one of the topics we covered this morning. We can hit it again this afternoon if some of you have a question about it or it comes up again as we're talking about it. But in the NAM report, NAM was pretty evasive. There were only 2 questions allowed after the report. and they were kind of softball kind of questions almost. And Ezel was fully prepared to answer those questions, and we can go back and look at those again in a little bit if we want to. But the reality is, some of these things, when you're looking at the NAM situation, there were just all kinds of things that should have been asked and needed to be asked. And we talked about that a little bit in the first session as we went on at that point. Well, we've got joining us now, John Bullock. John, good to have you with us. John is in Texas, so we're glad to have him with us as well. John, we're just kind of getting started. We've just talked about the presidential election so far, touched a little bit on NAM, but we're looking really at the stuff that kind of happened after that with the executive committee report. And then as we started getting into some of the miscellaneous business, as we started talking about that in the afternoon and some of the other motions that were made. Let me just pause for a second. And any thoughts you have kind of reflecting back over the afternoon and morning, since you weren't with us this afternoon earlier, kind of what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not surprised as we look at the election with Bart Barber being selected. A lot of people try to attribute it to different speeches, to Jarrett Stevens' speech versus Willie Rice of happy versus negative. I think really honestly, one of the biggest points that changed watching it was whenever one of the difficult situations came up and Bart handled it well and, got a big laugh and a big response from the room. You can tell he was a lot more comfortable at that point, as well as his peak, kind of Bart Barber and what makes him appealing to people. So if you see if you're in like the Baptist Review or other places, it played very well to his personality at that point. So I'm not surprised at the results of the election. Plus, I mean, for Mike Stone, it's a difficult election. He's going against an incumbent. It's the very first time that that's really happened in a long while. So, I'm really not surprised that we saw the result that we did with that. Definitely with NAM, I think you see a lot of people pushing for transparency. And, at some point later, we can dive into one of the responses that was given during the report. But seeing the 990s get pushed back to another time, I think I'm interested to see where that all leads. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
a lot of
and
stuff
I'd like to dig into that a little bit with you. I know you've been tracking that pretty close as well. And really the 990 issue has really ballooned, I guess we could say, really mushroomed since all this stuff has become public going on at Southwestern. So now you have another entity. It's all of a sudden, what? We spent $1.5 million renovating a presidential home that's already a really nice home, So most of us are, we're getting furniture over here at the Goodwill, and so
But well, to Ezel's credit, his line about the Keurigs was very well placed.
Well prepared,
very well prepared. Now, all you have to ask is, what kind of house is that Keurig in? So, one of the big things that, what was it, 2021, pastor and messenger stood up, asked for the salary structure. He said he was given, months to ask about it. And then he asked the trustees, the chairman of the trustees, chairman of the finance committee, and then was told to ask it from the stage and then was denied again. I think one of the big questions messenger should have is where's the salary structure? It's in the business financial plan. We still don't see it. So they can talk about all the failures of Adam Greenway, but if you look at the finance of NAM, 40% of, I'm going back through and trying to recall off the top of my head, I believe it's 40% of their expenditures was salaries. And if you notice, there's a difference this year. Typically, they would report those salaries in the salary area or on that line item. But now the salaries for all the Send Network employees are packaged inside of the church planting budget. So you have to pay attention. It's not just that salary line anymore. You have to look at that. And if you look actually in the report, they mention it's about 40%, which is pretty high for a nonprofit.
No question. It really is. And the problem is the whole issue, while we're talking about the NAM issues, when you're talking about that, you have to remember this push for the 990s. People don't really realize this, and I know it was stated on the floor, but the 990 is the form that the IRS requires out of any nonprofit unless it's deemed a church, unless it's considered to be a church or church organization. So our entities don't file that. And so the pushback has been, don't you think we should at least be giving to our donors the minimum requirements that are given to other people who are donating? And what people don't realize is if you just want kind of a comparison, okay? So the North American Mission Board and our other entities, but there's a lot of focus on NAM right now. But NAM is failing to file at least the same level of transparency as Planned Parenthood.
Yeah. Well, one of
really?
I mean, that's really the case. You look at 990s again, and you can say, well, they don't have to file it. Okay. Well, so one of the things that, if I'm a layperson, but if you read the Johnny Hunt article, that was something that I worked on with Maya Namora and Mark Wingfield at Baptist News Global, and they are rock stars when it comes to writing and helping. But one of the ways that we're able to figure out a lot of the stuff related to how he was profiting, and if you look at kind of his role with NAM, was because of 990s. Otherwise, with regular Southern Baptists, you may not ever really get to see that kind of detail or be able to put those kinds of dots together. And we've seen, trustee failures with Southwestern. You can blame it on Greenway, but at the end of the day, no one set a budget for that house. So,
and in all fairness, I mean, let's just stop for a second. In all fairness, if you go back and look at the reign of Paige Patterson there, I've been in that office. I've been there, visited, in the home multiple times. Of course, I was a student there back in the 80s, but since then, as an executive director and an associational missionary, I've been to Southwestern over and over, sometimes multiple times in a year. So I've been in those facilities multiple times. And you went in Paige Patterson's office, and the kind of decorations, the kind of things he had in there from all of his, overseas hunts in Africa and all these other things, the head of boars and all kinds. I mean, tons of money was spent. And so I think there has been the establishment of just not watching it closely. And I know I worked in the PR department when I was a student at Southwestern. And so I was a photographer. So photographers are inside everything's happening, right? We're documenting everything. And so as a photographer, I'd be in those trustee meetings. I'd been in, all kinds of other meetings, and you're just listening. I'm a student, but I'm real interested in what's going on. And so I'm listening, and many times the excuse is, well, we can spend this because we have donors that are giving that. And this isn't cooperative program money. It's coming from somewhere else. And one of the reasons that NAM has given multiple times, I've heard Ezell say it and others say it too, but one of the reasons they've often given for some of the things they've done, say, well, that's from private donors.
Yes.
Well, my question is, I want to clarify what private donors means, okay? Because I'm a private donor when I give to my church, and my church sends cooperative program dollars, and those cooperative program dollars are then sent to NAM through the process. But that's coming from a private donor. Every one of us are. Right?
Yeah.
So to me, that's a kind of a wordplay that, and I'm not saying they necessarily are misusing it, but there's a lot of money being spent on things that we've questioned, and they've said, nah, private donors took care of that.
Well, I mean,
so, a lot of question marks.
Yeah. And that's absolutely right. Whenever it comes to looking at the trustees, it's not just new failures. I think a lot of these are long-standing issues that we've had in the SBC that, again, we need to take a look in or require more accountability to the actual messengers, not just the trustees. We need to take a look at actual messengers. And you talk about wordplay. One of the things that I thought was interesting from the NAM report, I don't want to go back there too much, but some people caught it online, the response to Dusty Devers, whenever he asked his question about Echo Church. He said, well, we just use it as space. If you look at what was posted online related to what was actually happening at Echo, I mean, it's very clearly a NAM, one of the co-founding pastors was a NAM Send Network church planter trainer. It's not just an empty space they use for an event. So, we can be told a lot of words, but we really got to make sure that the data backs it up.
And it wasn't just event space, because they had full assessments. I
Yes.
mean, they
Yeah.
had people from all over that part of the country that'd fly in to come there. And I know it's a fairly large facility, but the reality is there's probably a lot of our even mid-sized churches would have a large enough facility with extra classrooms for assessment groups and
Yeah.
couples and all that other kind of stuff to be able to do, and plenty of hotels to put people up in. I mean,
Yeah.
they didn't put them up in hotels in the church, obviously. So yeah, that was a bit of a wordplay. I caught that too. I thought that
I
was
mean,
kind of interesting.
it's a wordplay at best.
Yeah,
At
yeah.
best. I mean, if you take it on its face value, I think it's a little bit worse, and some people ought to be
Okay,
looking into that.
it's a
But
deflection.
I don't even
It's
know
a
if it's a deflection.
deflection.
I mean, it's clearly the guy, they had a bigger relationship than just a
Right.
space for an event. I mean, it's one of those things you a deflection may be even the best way of looking at it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, when it comes to any of these things, it's not just a one-off failure from a leader, especially Southwestern. I mean, it is the graphs that they released. It shows it's a trend with spending, and they may set some controls, but often those controls come a little too late. So it's one of those things where that 990s, in terms of it going directly to the messengers, and that's being something reported to us, I think only helps boost confidence, because it's very clear a lot of the entities, their trustees are losing our
Right.
confidence, not
Right.
just the entity. It's the trustees
Yeah.
are losing our confidence. And that's not just from the CBN wing or some other wing of the SBC. You see broad support for the 990s if you look even on Twitter or online.
Right. Yeah. Well, and last year, when I was asked, what's your overview? What's your initial thought about, the annual meeting? And I said, well, the recurring theme was transparency. I
Yeah.
mean, the whole meeting, there were multiple things that came up asking for transparency to the messengers. Well,
Yeah.
we're already seeing that again this year a little bit too.
Absolutely.
Laura asked where Bart Barber's from. Bart is from Farmersville, Texas, isn't it?
Texas. Yep.
Farmersville, yeah.
Yeah.
He pastors First Baptist Church of Farmersville. So it's a suburb, basically a northern suburb, I believe, of Dallas, if I remember right.
Yeah, he's I think it's the Collins Association. So same, I believe it's the same
Yep.
association as Jack Graham and Prestonwood.
Yep. I
He's in
believe
that
that's
same
correct.
region.
Yep. I believe that's correct. Yeah. Yeah. It is. Let's look at a couple of other things. There were several
All right.
motions that were kind of thrown aside that I thought were interesting, but I think are very necessary. There was a motion for trustee training, and that training occur prior to service. I believe the way he stated in the motion was that they should be trained, prior to serving in that annual meeting where they're appointed, where they're
Yeah.
elected, and that it happened, the week before, right before the convention, in the host city or whatever. And I think that's a great idea. The one caveat, we talked about this briefly this afternoon, but the one caveat I would make to that is that kind of training needs to take place by an outside entity. It doesn't need to be just the entity training. It needs to be an outside group. And they're professional groups that do nothing but train nonprofit boards. That's all they do. And
Yeah.
they're legal firms, but they give you all of the legal requirements you have as a board member, what you need to be looking at for accountability, what the financial perspective needs to be for different parameters, all that kind of stuff. And they go through all of that stuff that is standard, just standard among nonprofits when they're looking at that. And then the individual entity could take the last part of that training time and say, okay, at Lifeway, this is what we do. At Southwestern Seminary, this is what, and train them on the specifics of their kind of ministry that they need to know as a trustee. But there needs to be a uniform training process that the messengers can go back and be told, here are the things that we're training our trustees on, and be able to hold them accountable. Because at this point, the only trustee training they're getting are in-house. So it's basically whatever the entity leader and that group want to, basically tell those new trustees. And if they want to gift them with a bunch of big gifts, and I think I said earlier, I think it would probably be a good thing for there to be a policy put in place with our financial plan, for the SBC, that no trustee should receive any benefit of any kind of gift from from the entity they're serving. In other
Well,
words, if you're serving at, Southwestern Seminary and you're flown
Yeah.
in for a trustee meeting, that they can't give you a bunch of nice gifts. If you go to NAM, they can't give you a bunch of backpacks and sweaters and jackets and coats and you know,
Trips to Puerto Rico.
yeah, well, yeah, just, I mean, you know, hey, yeah, we're going to give you all this stuff. And,
Yeah.
and that's nice. And I understand it all has their logo on it, you know, and they're trying to be supportive. But if those trustees want it, let them buy it from the gift shop at NAM. Let them buy it from the gift shop
Well,
at Southwestern.
you know, even if they got the swag, I think the biggest trustee challenge we have, especially, so there's two parts to it. The first one is related whenever it comes to, like, I'd say compensation, is there's several times you can look at trustees and they get some speaking opportunities, they get their name out there more through these entities, and you know, it's not always a bad thing, but I would say sometimes there may be more of a benefit to the trustee, or the trustee has some books that may be published or sold or handed out by their entities, and they may or may not receive royalties. We really don't know for some of these deals. I imagine some of them do. You know, normally that's going to be a problem with the two content creators with the SBC, which would be like Lifeway and NAM, which
Right.
does, you know, hand out people's books.
Yep.
But the other one is, it's not just the training, I think, that's really needed beforehand. It's really the guidelines of what on earth the trustee is supposed to do. Because, you know, looking at Southwestern, one of their big kind of statements was that they thought the president should be really setting everything financially. And it seemed like there's some confusion in some of the responses related to that, or that they
Yeah.
thought that they did not need to be watching as closely as they needed to. So now they've put in place safeguards. You know, trustees at a normal nonprofit would have known way ahead of time, we need to be really looking at this. It's not just up to a president. Because again, that's where you see multiple presidents in a row. I think you see some issues with the expenses, and you know, having their essentially own taxidermied zoo in their house.
Yeah.
You know, all that. So
Yeah. Well, and yeah, there just need to be some checks and balances. And
absolutely.
the entity, anytime you work for an entity, there's certain things that you buy. But I
Yeah.
pastored multiple churches. I've planted churches. I worked for 2 associations. I worked for a state convention, and I didn't ever expect them to furnish the personal stuff in my office. I didn't expect them to
Yeah.
pay for personal trips. I didn't expect them to do any of that kind of thing. And if I was on a business trip to a convention or something else, I might
Yeah.
buy some quote unquote swag from New Orleans if I was there, or something else, but that's coming out of
Yeah.
my pocket. That's
Yeah.
my pocket. I
Absolutely.
buy a t-shirt for my wife. That's out of my pocket. I buy some
Yeah.
gifts for my kids. That's out of my pocket. I'm not furnishing
Yeah.
my office with a bunch of stuff that comes out of the monies that our people are giving. To me, there's just not even a question that should have even
Yeah.
come across at all.
Well,
Look,
it's that.
let's shift direction again.
Yeah.
One of the big things going into today was the issue about Saddleback. So there
Yeah.
was a motion to amend the Baptist Faith and Message to add the words elder and overseer to the office of pastor. Now, that was dealt with, and it was to be referred. This is one that was to
Yeah.
be referred, if I remember right. But this whole issue of this was discussed multiple times back and forth, and there were several different ways it was brought up. And the resolution, let's see, where's my resolutions? The resolution that was discussed about ministry and adding that, the importance of that, someone had submitted a resolution. Give me a second. I'm looking for it. Nope. Well, folks may be interested. Let's just hit real quick on what the resolutions were. When I get it, I'll stop on it. The
Sounds
first
good.
one was on the importance of revitalization and replanting, which was good. And that passed basically without much any question. On needed care and support for pastors and ministry leaders, that was good as well. Didn't have any problems with it. The biggest problem the chair had was people not understanding what was happening in the process. They would come, hit the point of order button, or they'd come wanting to make a motion or speak to something else. And he had to go back to that over and over today. And I think that's part of that's kind of par for the course, I guess you could say, in a huge assembly like this, because you got so many people that aren't accustomed to the parliamentary procedure. The third one was on, and I thought this was interesting, on artificial intelligence and emerging technologies. This one's interesting to read. You can actually go to the sbcannualmeeting.net website, sbcannualmeeting.net website, and download these pages that are these resolutions. But The resolutions committee made the statement after this one was approved that we are, as Southern Baptists, the first denominational group in the country that they're aware of that has approved anything on the rapidly changing technology like the AI. And Bart Barber, one of his funny moments, he had several, but one of his funny moments is when he turned to him and he said, "Now, did y'all use Chat GPT to help write that?" So,
I know that was a missed opportunity. That was a missed
I
opportunity to
know.
have
I
not only
thought
the
that was
first one on
hysterical.
AI, but the first one written by AI.
Yeah. That would have been
Or at least
perfect.
openly.
Yeah, or he could have said, "Well, we just used it to spell check or something,"
Yes.
But
Oh, yeah.
anyway, that was still kind of a funny moment.
That was a
The
good
fourth
moment.
one was on wisely engaging immigration, and it passed very quickly.
Yeah.
Fifth one was on the legacy and responsibility of women fulfilling the Great Commission. It also passed. It wasn't about women pastors, but just acknowledging the importance of women in church and in ministry. Number 6 was on the Southern Baptist confessional heritage of the office of bishop, elder, and pastor. This is the one that started quite a bit of conversation as we were looking at that one. Were you watching at that time? Did you see this particular one to comment?
So I'm trying to remember. There's a lot that happened in the day, but I do remember
Yeah.
watching that one. So
yeah,
I mean,
what
just in
thoughts
terms
did
of
you have about because the conversation went back and forth a number of different times. And I tell you what, right before you comment, let's bring Ray on. Ray is just joining us. Hi, Ray. Good to have
Hello.
you.
Just wrapped up
good to
my own
have you.
stream and post game coverage a little
Well,
bit
I
that I
know
did.
it's
It
become a
went
long
late.
day fast. Yeah, it did. It went real late. Well, what we're talking about right now is we're kind of walking through the resolutions real fast, Ray.
Yeah, I just
and we're
read
looking at
resolution 3. It's a mouthful, but
yeah, it is. We're looking at resolution 6 right now on the Southern Baptist confessional heritage of the office of bishop, elder, and pastor. So John was about to comment kind of on some of his observations because this had a lot of conversation back and forth too. So John, go ahead.
I'll go. I just have a really short comment, and that was it went very long. I think it's a lot of really trying to get the minutia of what is going on, as well as people trying, there's a lot of concern about leaving the door too wide open. Anytime we're discussing that, the concern is about how wide we leave that door open. Are we leaving too much room? Is this being debated now well enough? And I think a lot of people going into it, you had both the Mike Law amendment group, and then you have people more from Baptist 21, kind of the stuff they were putting forward. So that's really my small comment on it. You probably have a lot more insight on that, Bobby, than I do, or maybe Ray. But that it seemed like there was a subtext kind of debate going on in the background that people were coming from.
Yeah, I think that definitely is true. Ray, what were your thoughts about that part of it? Because we had this issue. I was just saying before you jumped on that the issue, of course, it's a lot of it's leading up to the Saddleback thing. There'd been so much hype on it, but when this resolution was brought, this was before the Saddleback thing had been brought at this point, and so there was a lot of conversation at this point. So Ray, what were your thoughts at this point?
Resolution 6,
right?
I mean,
on the.
I read the resolution like as they're about to bring it forward. I'm like, wow, there's something obviously missing in this resolution. The resolutions committee, which I would regard as a liberal entity, is that's why they had liberal resolution 4 and stuff. And I find it very suspicious that the resolution on transgenderism was pushed back, but maybe we'll get to it tomorrow. But very suspicious that they left out the obvious, language of male leadership in a church. They set themselves up for this amendment debate. And then I couldn't tell whether they accepted the amendment as hostile or friendly or not. They kind of just said, we'll let the messengers decide. Yeah. I guess is that a thing you can do?
Yeah, you can. When the amendment comes to the floor, if it gets a second, then it has to be acted on first. And in one case, we had an amendment and then an amendment of the amendment. You'll remember that. And so you have to act. You basically, it's kind of you're tearing down. So then you have to go back up in reverse and approve each one of those. So you approve this amendment or disprove it. Take it or don't. Next one, the same thing: adopt it or don't adopt it. And then you're back to the original resolution at that point, or the amendment, depending on which it is. So that's kind of standard case. But yeah, they kept going back and forth over the issue of putting the word male in there. And the argument from the committee, basically in presenting it, was they felt like, one, it said biblical, And I just know from dealing with a lot of the legal, lawyers and that kind of thing over Constitution and bylaws, they just say that you can't just say, we believe the Bible and we're sticking to the Bible. Because a court, if you were to end up in court over something, the court is not going to make a ruling on what the Bible says. Okay. They're just not. That's
religious document.
Yeah, it's a religious document. So they're not going to do that. So what they recommend, lawyers recommend, is that you're more specific and say, we're going to follow what the Bible says, and then you basically interpret it in the next sentence or a bullet point or something to say, we interpret that to mean that. And I think that's kind of how I took it. The guy who particularly was pushing a little harder on trying to add the word men only, in that, but it ended up failing ultimately. They stayed with what the committee had presented at that point. And so, and I don't think it was a bad resolution at that point, but it did stir up a little bit debate. Next resolution. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Every resolution has some sort of context undergirding it.
Yeah.
And I thought resolution 2 was about, COVID accountability. It was kind of about that issue, but the way that it was framed was, resolution 2 should have had an amendment that said resolved, we call on pastors to repent for wrong decisions that they made.
Oh, yeah.
That would have that would have patched everything up, and that would have solved, I think that would have made every side happy that was thinking about it. I see the resolutions and I see, okay, what's the context for this? Like last year they had the evangelicals or the pro-life for Biden, evangelicals for Biden resolution, because in 2022 they want to talk about partial birth abortion, which is insane. That's just insane. 2006 called, but resolution 6, that the issue going on to this convention is the women pastor debate.
Yeah. No, that's been very clear. Yeah.
You knew that was it. You were kind of trying to speak to it, and then you don't speak to it, and you just kind of opened yourself up. I'm surprised that it worked. I'm surprised that the messengers were able to amend it successfully. And with little opposition. There was hardly any opposition. There was more opposition to that resolution than the others, but not nearly enough to stop it. And you saw that Rick Warren was done after that, I thought.
Yeah, well, and we're going to come to that in just a minute, so hold those comments on that. But yeah, I agree with you. He was pretty well done. Let's John, did you have another comment on that? I was going to jump back through the other resolutions that we hit real quick.
I think we've got a lot of ground to cover with that. So let's jump into
we do.
Others.
So we'll keep moving on those others. Yeah, number 7 was on Christ's soul lordship over every human conscience. That one, just no problem. It passed quickly.
Yeah.
On opposing gender transitions. That was one that I thought might be debated a little bit, not as in opposing, but there'd be some comment. But it really didn't have much comment. I don't think there are many Southern Baptists that are.
Wait, did they pass that? I thought they didn't get to that yet.
That's one they hadn't gotten to. Yeah. You're exactly right. That's why I didn't remember any comment.
They have a second session tomorrow afternoon.
Yep.
It's the last.
The second resolution. So the last one they did was resolution 6, wasn't it? On the elders and pastors.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. Yep. That's right. And so let's move beyond that then. Let's talk about the Fern Creek Baptist Church and Saddleback Church. And there was a third one, but it was a little different kind of a situation. But these two were appealing based on or they were appealing the action of the executive committee, which the Credentials Committee had made a recommendation to the executive committee. The executive committee had accepted that recommendation and had disfellowshipped these churches back in February in their February meeting. So these churches were already disfellowshipped. They're not Southern Baptists as far as we're concerned at that point, because the executive committee work on our behalf in between annual meetings, because the messengers only gathered these 2 days during the year. So they acted on our behalf, and that was a done deal. So what was happening was there is a 30-day appeal process that you have to submit an appeal within 30 days. These 3 churches, but these 2 on the women issue came back and they were appealing it. So the first one that they took was Fern Creek Baptist. And this is a woman. And I tried to get her name. I think it was Linda something. I didn't get the whole name. But she's been the pastor there. been in the church 40-something years, but been pastor there for 30 years. Talked about how conservative they were. She was passionate. I'm telling you, if there's a woman preacher you can hear, she worked up a crowd. You could tell. And she had a bunch of her members around her of different ages. And mostly women, some young women and some older women. I think if I was trying to make an appeal, I would have probably done much the same as far as that goes. But they ended up having to cut her off because she was going beyond her 3 minutes, and they warned them about that ahead. You just have 3 minutes. One of the things that, just an aside, that Barber implemented this year as the president, he put a ticker, basically a countdown clock that can be seen on all the screens. And this is something usually only the speakers see. So if you're on a platform like that, there usually is a countdown clock down in front of you. So nobody else sees it. So if you go over, nobody knows it, right? So, you got it, and it's clicking down 10 minutes is all you have, and you finish it, hit 0, and you keep talking for 4 more minutes. It's a little awkward to pull you off. But by doing this, everybody in the crowd now sees that you've hit your time. So I thought that's a great addition, especially in a big group. Still didn't delay the group, but anyway, I think it's a great idea. But anyway, she made a strong appeal. They had to vote on each of these individually, and they had to vote on them, just one at a time, and walk through them individually. So when they had her come up, it was pretty clear that the messengers in the room were not favorable. In spite of her always having been Southern Baptist, been grown up, educated Southern Baptist, all the other things she said about being Southern Baptist, it's just that one piece. And so they had Al Mohler come, and he responded. So you two guys, Ray, why don't you start? Give us your kind of take on Al Mohler's response to the Fern Creek Baptist Church presentation as they appealed.
He absolutely, I think he just destroyed her, but it was kind of an easy, that's a dunk for him. Like, that's not, it wasn't really a challenge for him. He knew the room. He read the room. She did not read the room. She was speaking to a different audience than what was in the room, because she came out full bore, and he just, could just stay, keep it clean, keep it straight and narrow, don't stray, just stay on message. And that's all he had to do. Al Mohler did what he needed to do. And, the executive committee, was pretty wise or strategic to choose him to be the one to do the dunking, I guess.
Yeah, well, and he actually was on the committee that wrote the 2000 Baptist Faith and Message. So he had been behind the scenes, and but the next one that came when they took that vote, that was pretty evident that it was overwhelmingly against Fern Creek Baptist. And you pretty well, even watching online, you kind of got the sense that the room was pretty clearly turned at that point. And then Rick Warren came on behalf of Saddleback for their appeal. And John, talk about Rick Warren when he came.
Well, I'm actually, if I can go to Fern Creek, and the reason why I say that is I had to miss Rick Warren, so you may go to Ray for Rick Warren's. On Fern Creek, one of the things I think we'll see is, it's very clear which way the room was going to vote. So I think Linda, whenever she went in there, she really didn't have a shot. I think they'll use a lot of clips from her speaking whenever they play or other news outlets talk about it.
It'll be on the news tonight, I'm sure.
I'll hopefully clip it.
Well, I was going to say, I think Mohler, they picked for the executive committee to get done what they needed to get done. They picked Mohler, and they couldn't. I think that was the right pick. But for Linda, she did get her dunks in on a few people whenever she was giving her thing, talking to, her goal was to get passion across, and she did. And then her passion for the SBC. And then she took some shots at people like Deaver and others whenever it came to our church didn't shut down. She was taking some shots on her way out.
She said her church didn't shut down?
She said we opened earlier, we didn't shut down. She was taking some shots at some pastors who may have. And I don't know if she thought she had a shot going into it, but she was making some statements on her way out the door.
Her
definitely
point, I think her closing thesis was that she's more conservative than a lot of you.
Oh yeah, no. That's absolutely so. Yeah,
Well,
yeah, that's absolutely what she was saying.
That's what she said, but it's like,
yeah,
that was.
okay.
Oh yeah,
But,
no, she kind of said that several times.
she did. But I mean, it's very clear if you read the audience interaction as Mueller was speaking, which way that vote was going to go.
Right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's too. Laura asked about that. Is Fern Creek out of Louisville? I can't remember. Do one of you guys remember?
It is out of Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay, so it's out of Louisville, Kentucky. Okay, so let's move on to Saddleback then. And Ray, do you want to address how Rick Warren approached the crowd when he came up? And just one note, I have known Rick a long time ago. I haven't known him much in recent years, but he apparently is having more physical health problems because he had a cane with him. So he'd come to the microphone, was standing there holding his cane to kind of keep his balance. So not sure what's going on with that. That's not a good thing.
He had some knee injury.
Ah, okay. Well, anyway, give us your impression, Ray, of his plea for the appeal.
I mean, he just rehashed his Twitter rants on the convention floor. I think a lot of people knew exactly his arguments ahead of time because he gave them ahead of time. And he just kind of sounded like a broken record to some degree. He tried to dunk on Al Mueller. Bold strategy, Cotton.
Talk about that a little bit.
Didn't really work out for him because Al Mueller could just say you misrepresented me, and just like you misrepresented this portion of scripture and all that, you set yourself up for failure. I think this was, a man's ego just doesn't want to lose or concede defeat. That's kind of what it sounded like. He was just rehashing his old arguments.
Well, and to rehashing arguments, I will say there's something to that in the SBC, and that is a lot of people go into the decisions beforehand. So you probably didn't have a lot of new content because a lot of the debate and a lot of decision making really happens before anybody gives a speech in the convention.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you have a certain portion, a certain number of those that aren't informed and hadn't kept up and, hadn't watched. And so they are potentially swayed by some of that. But a lot of those, especially in recent years, you can see the attendance at the annual meeting has gone back to growing again, over 10,000. And for a number of years, I remember several years, like when he was in Virginia several years back, it was down in the 8,000 or something, after the GCR had first passed. And so, the numbers are getting up, which tells you the controversy is getting more intense in different areas. And so people are coming. And it's like one pastor I talked to the other day, he said, well, I'm planning on being at the convention. I'm bringing 6 of my members with me. This guy's never been to a convention, but he was bold that I'm going this year. I've heard enough of this and I'm bringing my people with me. And so I think, some of those laity that may be coming hadn't been tracking it as well, but their pastor is bringing them and saying, look, this is what's happening. And so they're getting at least that perspective one way or the other. Yeah. I thought it was quite interesting to hear Al Mueller respond to Warren at that point because, and he did, he handled it. He was passionate, no question. He was passionate. And in his earlier remarks to the Fern Baptist, I'm trying to remember, he said, it's about doctrine and something else. I wrote the note down. I'd have to look. Doctrine and polity. Those were the two things he highlighted. It's about doctrine and polity. The doctrine, we need to stand by what we've always believed as Baptists, that, men are the ones who are pastors. And that's a God call thing. And then our polity as Southern Baptists for all these years has been, that's what we say. And that's what we put in a 2000 Baptist Faith and Message. And so when he came to Saddleback, he wasn't really having to repeat any of that. He just picked up on part B, at that point, but he handled it with class because he did shield off what Warren had said, just simply saying, well, you've misrepresented what actually was said, but I'm not going to waste my time basically to respond to that because, and then he went into his plea as well. And of course was well thought out and didn't get cut off because he speaks in front of people all the time on a timer and he watched that clock. I bet you it didn't have but a few seconds left. Yeah, I bet he didn't have but a few seconds left because he just keeps talking till he sees the time's out. So, but anyway, that was pretty interesting. And Ray, I'm trying to remember the third church that
Freedom Church.
Yep, that's it. That was Freedom Church. And do you remember exactly what their appeal was at that point?
Well, Yeah, go ahead. You may know more, Ray, but
Yeah, actually, we covered their disfellowshipping. So just reviewing what the article said. Freedom Church, located in Vero Beach, Florida. This church was disaffiliated over its refusal to cooperate with a sexual abuse allegation. Freedom Church is helmed by Richard Demzik, a former Anglican priest who switched to the Baptist team. He is reported to be a former pastor, according to an unrelated article that covered his Black Lives Matter activism. He is a TikToker with 17K followers. While the nature of the allegation is unclear, Demzik could be at the forefront, but it's unlikely as he hasn't been pastor for 3 years at least. So we're not really sure who the pastor was. We're not sure. Like, there's this shady woke pastor that was involved and is no longer involved with the church. I'm not. Yeah. Did they mention a name of a pastor?
No. The guy who made the appeal was this guy, Donald Stewart. I just put it on the screen, and he was not dynamic at all as far as making the appeal. But he did list off actions they had taken.
And he sounded contrite.
Yeah, he did. He sounded very contrite that they were trying to get, they wanted to be Southern Baptist, wanted to get back in Southern Baptist. And this guy who'd come in had been Anglican, right? And
maybe it was him. It might have been a different pastor. We're not sure who's the pastor.
The question,
the issue. But
the question I saw being raised on Twitter. Well, what I was going to say, the question I saw being raised on Twitter was that why would they have an Anglican group do the investigation
if it wasn't Richard Demzik?
That's right. And the reason was because this guy had an Anglican connection, is where it was. But anyway, the pastor now resigned May something. And they said they have an interim now who's long-term Southern Baptist, and they really want to be Southern Baptist. But the committee, go ahead, Ray. Go ahead.
That's the confusing part, because Richard Demzik is the one with the he's the woke pastor there that they hired. That's apparently also a groomer, allegedly. But he was formerly Anglican. I guess the Anglican church did it. So that lines up with he's the suspect, but he also hasn't been the pastor there for years. And and I got that out of an article about some viral TikTok that he had. So it's very strange for the convention to come back and say, no, he absolutely is still the pastor there. He's in leadership, but he just hasn't resigned. So they accused the church of lying on the floor, which without really any evidence.
Yeah, that was the interesting part, because I think that's hard because the church doesn't get to respond, because the very last thing we heard before it went to really a vote was that there was essentially, how it was described, is like there was a plot, pull back the pastor until they got back in the Southern Baptist Convention and maybe people stopped looking, then he'd come back forward, the one that there was this issue about. Because if you just went off Donald Stewart's statement, you go, okay, well, they're taking steps. But it's very clear from the committee that they believe that there's an effort by the church to pretend they had pulled him back, but he was still really in a leadership role, and that he had come back after all the SBC stuff had blown over for him. So, but that it's hard, because again, if that's not true, the church never got a chance to respond, and we really never saw anything. And messengers have to make a decision like right then. They don't get a chance to really examine the evidence on that one.
Yeah,
you can lie with impunity.
Well, and I understand, and these are the rules of the convention. I mean, the way they handle the appeal, being able to make appeal. So the rules of the convention, and I'm assuming that's because that parallels with Robert's Rules of Order for an appeal of a decision, is what I'm assuming. I don't know that rule, but I'm assuming that because he said several times about it. This is, the rules of the convention. So the problem is you get 3 minutes to make your appeal, to state your appeal, and then the committee who's bringing that, in this case, the executive committee or the credentials committee, get 3 minutes to state their case. And so the last case being stated, obviously, is on the side sticking with the committee, which is not abnormal. Normally, if somebody has presented something, the first one you take is, are you opposed? And then for, opposed, for, when you're going back and forth. So that's not out of norm with how parliamentary procedure normally works. But I agree with you that it especially with that particular one with Freedom Church, it just kind of left you hanging. It just kind of left you hanging at that point without any question at that point. So other thoughts at that point. Just to clarify, Laura, Donald Stewart is the man who is making the presentation on Freedom Church. Just so you know. Yeah. He's the man that was making the presentation on Freedom Church. Other thoughts about any of the other motions that were made later in the day?
A lot of them were liberal and woke.
Yeah, talk about that just a second.
So in the morning session, you saw a lot of conservative motions brought forth. In the afternoon session, you saw the liberals get their, someone create a racial identity task force to determine racial policies and stuff like that. It was just like, okay, this is going nowhere. And then let's have all these study committees. Let's study the effectiveness of NAM, the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. Although there was one really funny one, probably the best one was let's study the International Mission Board's vaccine mandate and its effect on missionaries, their health, and recruitment. So I thought that was the best motion brought forth in that second session, because that is needed.
Yeah, no doubt.
Well, in terms of the vaccine, I think one of the things that's come up and different people argue about is the reason given being for health. I've heard some different things from other missionaries related to possibly insurance or other things for the International Mission Board. If that's the case, they should just be transparent about why they pushed it. And again, I think it's one of those things. Remember, it doesn't just affect the missionaries; it also affected kids over a certain age would also have to take that if they are missionaries' kids. So, but I think in terms of the way church plant thing for NAM, is they wanted to talk about effectiveness. I imagine that's going to get shut down because it's going to be telling an entity what to do. It's probably going to be the justification. But it is something that I understand we used to know what churches we were planting in 2009 before, and now we don't. And there's a lot of questions over efficacy after, one of the other misconceptions and misstatements. It's not, there's, 10,000 churches. A lot of people say 10,000 churches, 10 years. It's 10,000 churches since 2010. And the question is, how many did NAM fund? How many did they not fund? How many of those are still around? How many of those then became a replant or a merger or something else came later? Again, we're told it's working. We don't get to see if it really is. We get some anecdotal evidence on occasion. So I understand the person wanting to ask, where have they moved? I think the way that they laid out what the data they want to see is great. I doubt we'll get the chance to see that, though.
Yeah. Well, there's no question that there were lots of questions. And once again, what's his name? John Whitehead.
John Whitehead,
the attorney in Missouri. We've had him on before too, and he's going to do a follow-up with us here next week. But John Whitehead came to the floor again. Okay.
Yep.
And last year he did that trying to help get the financial transparency deal that kept being pushed, kept trying to get that for the financial transparency. And it eventually was ruled out of order and wasn't done. So he came back this time and was trying to get them to move forward as well. He actually has been a parliamentarian up on the stage in the Southern Baptist Convention in the past, so he does know parliamentary procedure pretty well. But they kind of went back and forth over that quite a bit when they were discussing that. Several of those issues related to that stuff that they were talking about at that point, Ray, what other thoughts do you have as we start wrapping up here?
I don't know. We haven't talked about the first vice presidential race, have we?
No. Go ahead and jump on that. Yeah.
I mean, I took a bathroom break during the first guy's speech because that was really boring and going nowhere. And then I come back for Dusty Devers, and wow, whoever gave the nominating speech for him gave a very good job. I mean, he's fighting the uphill battle of being the conservative in the room that voted 68% for Bart Barber.
Right.
And I don't quite. Fred Luter gave the Ed Litton's nominating speech, I believe. So that was a tough act to proceed, but they did it on the issue of abortion. That was, the money issue to make him vice president. It wasn't on liberal drift, but it was, basically take a stand on this issue. I thought that was a very good speech. I thought Fred Luter gave a very good speech as well in the opposite direction, but it's very clear, if you write for SBC Voices, you're a liberal and you shouldn't be trusted. And SBC Voices is also a very small website as far as web traffic goes. but I
Well, it
guess
is
they
now.
haven't. They have an overstated influence in the SBC, I guess.
Yeah, for a period of time, and it's been a while now, but for a period of time, they had a fairly significant influence in the sense of all traffic that was going about SBC issues. So they kind of got their claws in to some extent, but yeah, I think you're right. Now the traffic is very, very different.
Well, I think it probably partly comes too because there's less voices or different voices actually being like different opinions, different voices actually talking, and some very consistent opinions, very consistent thoughts as they go towards issues versus some other platforms.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, on the 990s, I thought Whitehead and both those guys that put forward their motions did a great job. I'm sad to see that both of those failed to get discussed on the floor. I think that's a big loss. Anytime we see something come with accountability and it gets referred to the convention, I mean, like, for example, the trustees and not having them keep coming back, not having recurring trustees constantly. If they've served on a board, we saw that fail. We may get a little bit more transparency, but I doubt we'll get to see the expenses that a 990 would actually show. My guess is we'll see that again next year.
I was going to say what our history is. I mean, just as a convention, is things are brought to the floor, and if it's not rejected on the floor, then what happens is it's referred to the entity it relates to or to the executive committee. And then the majority of those things are taken by that. And then the next year they come back and say, no, it wasn't possible to do that. No, it was outside the realm of what we're really supposed to be doing. Or I mean, there's some kind of explanation, and oftentimes not but 2 or 3 sentences that kind of rule it out, at that point. And then it's basically dead until somebody else makes another motion. And I don't know how many years it's going to take to finally get a motion that is done in such a way that it gets passed to the messengers to be able to get the transparency financially and otherwise.
Well, I think the committee did a good job in terms of responding to Whitehead and I forget the other guy's name, but they the way they phrased it was make sure what would be the liabilities, and from everything that's come from the task force, that's come from Guidepost, people are concerned about those kinds of things. But if they don't come forward with some changes next year, I think we'll see that happen again next year and maybe actually have a better shot. Only because people will see there's not major changes in with NAM over. I don't know if it's an over expenditure. There's no explanation of why the evangelism and relief budget was $30 million over budget. If you took a look at the investments, those were down 70 million from the previous year. And one of the reserves, 60 million, not in there either. So between Southwestern, between all kinds of things, I think we'll continue to see pushes for transparency because, again, a lot of people are running into walls with the entities themselves getting information.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No question. Well, and the other issue, too, that you see around the transparency issue is when you look back at all the annual meeting reports, and had mentioned earlier about Chuck Kelley's new book, and I've gone blank on the name of the book, but his new book, part of that book, he lays out all the annual meeting reports since the GCR passed, the Great Commission Resurgence. And he goes through and shows how all of the metrics are down and how NAM literally stopped reporting on several things that had always been reported on. And one of those key pieces was on evangelism. They always had a report on basically the 3 mission things they were responsible for, one of those being evangelism. And for years and years and years before the GCR, they had reported on evangelism numbers and that kind of thing as far as things that are going, other than just the crossover. But as soon as Ezel came in with the GCR, they stopped reporting that kind of stuff, stopped reporting on the number of planters they had, stopped reporting on how many planters were actually funded, that kind of thing. So there were a lot of discrepancies that we see now. So without any doubt, kind of sad. Well, look, let's do this. We're going to wrap up. Any final thoughts, any closing thoughts there, John? And then throw it to Ray, and then I'll wrap us up.
I mean, the closing thoughts from the day is we're pretty much at the same point we are. I think we'll continue to see highly dissatisfied Southern Baptists online. We'll continue to see a lot of the cans kicked down the road. We're going to have those same discussions. Those aren't going away anytime soon. And at some point, the SBC is going to have actually have these discussions and take some votes that actually make a difference. Because otherwise, they complain about complaints online. Well, that's because whenever we talk to entities, we have issues, we can't get through, and because we see some things that just seem out of line. So if they want to do that, they need to respond with transparency, accountability, and we just got to tackle some of these problems, and some people won't be happy with the outcome.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, Ray.
I mean, you basically summed up a lot. Not sure I can top that, but yeah, they basically are trying to blame you for being dissatisfied is kind of what I got out of, you see that in Dan Darling's tweets, and then it was that sentiment was parroted by the Bart Barber address. Yep. And you saw a little bit of that in Willie McLaurin's speech, which kind of blames you for not giving enough is kind of how I took that. But you're the problem.
I was going to say he was, just to interrupt you, just say Willie McLaurin. We didn't talk about him at all earlier, but yeah, he really was very intense, and at points, to your point, Ray, at points he was almost angry. I mean, and he's a good preacher. He is a good preacher, but you could tell he was very focused on his notes. He had really worked on that. He wanted to stick with what he had to say. And I'm sure it was timed and all that. He wanted to make sure, but there were points that, boy, he almost came across almost angry at that. And like you said, it was almost like, now you've got to do better.
You got to commit more and stuff.
Yeah. Well, and 2 years too at the EC, I would be a little upset as well. So,
well, and even in his report before he spoke, even in the other report, the way they talk about the budget, the way they talk about hitting their goals or being we're on target, hit our budget, all that kind of thing. The problem with all that is that they're not comparing that to other times. Now, like this year's budget is it's running about 5% ahead, if I remember the number right, about 5% ahead of where it was last year. Okay, so that's good. 5% isn't a huge amount, but that's good. But if you go back and compare even the budget goals over the last 10 years, and the numbers are doing this, they're getting lower and lower. Every year, the goals are being brought down because the overall gifts are going down. And then you have individuals you have individuals in churches, and Mike Stone was made very public about their church right now is taking all their mission money, their cooperative program money, and put it in escrow. And there are a lot of other churches doing that. There are churches that are doing that. And some of the state conventions have already put in place where churches can decide what they will restrict their funds from going to. In other words, they can say, here's our cooperative program dollars. We're still sending in our $250 or whatever it is, but we don't want any of this money to go to the ERLC and NAM, or we don't want any of this money to go to the Southwestern Seminary and NAM, or whatever. They can restrict. I think in Georgia, you can restrict up to 3. Other states is maybe 2, and states are doing it differently. But I mean, and the states had to do that because they realized they were getting so much pushback in the states that churches were saying, look, we're just going to stop giving altogether because of this going on at NAM and this going on over here, the ERLC or whatever. And so they finally had to do something to say, look, you need to keep supporting what we're doing in the state. Great stuff we're doing, keep supporting. And we're just going to make it possible for you to restrict how your gifts are being given at that point. So, yeah. Well, Ray, I interrupted you. Any other last thought?
No, that's basically a good segue. But yeah, I thought, McLaurin did sound a little bit angry. He started off giving some bad news, which was a definite different tenor than the previous reports. But where you thought he was going to, honestly address the issues, I did think he was kind of blaming the messengers, not the messenger, which is him. It kind of came across as that, in my opinion, but it started off a pretty conservative message and then kind of drifted into a regime message. So,
well, I think there's a lot of pressure for him to hold that line again as an interim. He's if he wants the job, I mean, he's been trying to get it for a while. But as you were talking, Bobby, and I'll probably get in trouble for referencing this doc with it. But there's a documentary that came out, "Shiny Happy People." In the SBC, we have shiny happy numbers and shiny happy reports. But when we get behind the scenes, that you can't keep blaming the messengers whenever there's a growing trend that you
Yeah.
see online of people withholding funds because they don't trust the convention and they
Right.
don't like what they see. You can't
Yeah.
ignore them.
Yeah, no, you sure can't. You just can't ignore them. And that's exactly what seems to be happening. Or they just explain it away. Yeah,
Yep.
they just explain it away. All right. Well, look, we're going to get off tonight. We'll be back on tomorrow at 1 o'clock after the morning session. And then we'll resume with another follow-up next week on Tuesday. We're doing a session on next Tuesday, and we'll promote that again on the channel and on some other platforms as well as you follow that. So we appreciate you guys joining us tonight to kind of have a debrief on this. Appreciate your insights, both of you. Appreciate it, Ray and John, for being with us tonight. And with that, we're going to say good night.
All right. Good night, Bobby. See y'all.